Welcome to Skywarn and the Incident Command System Part 2 in a two-part series looking at the application of the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System for Skywarn teams. My name is Colin McConkey, and at time of recording, I am privileged to serve as the Kent County Skywarn Coordinator for the fourth largest county within the great state of Michigan, home to the second largest population center in the state of Michigan, the city of Grand Rapids, of which I am currently a resident. And this video is specifically created not only for Kent County Skywarn team members, but also for anybody interested in Skywarn, as well as our neighbors to the north in Canada interested in CanWarn, which is the Canadian equivalent of the United States Skywarn program. We're going in this video to look at the application of ICS for severe weather incident response. If, however, you have not seen part one of this two-part series, part one looking at the National Incident Command System, I would strongly encourage you to go back and to watch that video before continuing. Part one specifically looked at the overall governance contained within the National Incident Management System for not only Skywarn, but for any public or private sector agency that is ultimately working together with others to meet the national preparedness goal to ensure that we have a prepared and resilient United States of America. Here in part two, we're going to look at how ICS, being a derivative of NIMS, specifically applies to severe weather incident response. Beginning first with our outline for this particular video, first let's review the basic definitions of Skywarn, NIMS, and ICS. Let's review the governing NIMS characteristics that Kent County Skywarn is continuously working to align ourselves underneath. We are then going to overview the incident command system and then specifically look at how we apply the incident command system to various types of Skywarn incidents. We're going to look at three different scenarios for how ICS can be applied at a very localized level for a very short severe weather incident, or can be applied at a very large level, such as an entire state for an extended period of time. And then we'll conclude by looking at some additional educational resources that I strongly recommend that all Kent County Skywarn team members take if they have not done so, or any interested Skywarn volunteer throughout the country. Beginning first with definitions. What is Skywarn? Skywarn is the volunteer weather spotter program created and owned by the National Weather Service in the United States. If you are a Canadian viewer, obviously CanWarn, to the best of my knowledge, is owned by Environment Canada, the Canadian equivalent of the U.S. National Weather Service. But Skywarn, being the volunteer NWS spotter program, and the NWS being the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction over it, is created by them, and it is also maintained and governed by them, such that the National Weather Service is fundamentally responsible for defining what Skywarn is, what the purpose of Skywarn is, and also responsible for determining how it is going to be administered in service of their local office. How that will function will be dependent on the specific needs of the National Weather Service office in your area. In the state of Michigan, for example, I know of at least two National Weather Service offices that have elected to go with a more area-wide approach, whereby the Skywarn program is more of an area-wide effort. My particular National Weather Service office here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, has elected that they administer the Skywarn program by delegating it to local emergency managers at the county level. My particular NWS office does not necessarily need a singular area-wide Skywarn program, but what they do need is effective county-level programs administered by local emergency managers. Again, how that structure looks, how it is administered, falls underneath the authority of the National Weather Service and ultimately no other agency other than the National Weather Service. And so just ensure that as a Skywarn team member and a leader, you understand how the National Weather Service office wants Skywarn fundamentally administered in your area. The National Incident Management System, or NIMS, provides the management principles for all levels of public sector and private sector incident response. Whether it's a single vehicle traffic accident or whether it is a Gulf of Mexico oil spill, NIMS provides those management principles and that governance for all levels for effective response for any kind of incident, large and small. ICS is the incident command system, which provides that comprehensive structure for responding to incidents, both large and small. ICS provides that command and that coordination piece of the National Incident Management System. And while we looked at NIMS characteristics in far greater detail in part one, I nevertheless want to quickly remind viewers and team members of what those characteristics are that will continue to govern Kent County Skywarn in the months and years to come. Common terminology, ensuring that we are using terms that are understood by everybody involved. Modular organization, whereby we build out the pieces that we need for incident response and we do not build out the pieces we do not need. Management by objectives, ensuring that Kent County Skywarn Command sets objectives appropriately to respond to the type of incident at play. Incident action planning, whereby the objectives are codified into a written IAP or action plan if needed, whether it be for severe weather or whether it be for a planned event such as an exercise. Manageable span of control, hugely important for any agency, but especially for Skywarn, whereby we ensure that as volunteer resources continue to mobilize for our Skywarn team, that we have enough leadership to effectively manage that span of control. Incident facilities and staging, not so much a concern for Skywarn spotting operations, but nevertheless something such as for search and rescue, which serves another ESF function. That is going to be critically important. By the way, if you're not familiar with the term ESF function, don't be concerned about that. You'll learn about that more as you continue studying NIMS and ICS. Comprehensive resource management is critically important for Skywarn teams and for our own team, ensuring that we are effectively and comprehensively managing a resource. A resource is a specific type of resource, whether it be personnel or whether it be equipment. So a resource could be a single Skywarn volunteer. It could be a fleet of vehicles if we are mobile spotters, which our team currently does not have mobile spotters, but that is not outside the realm of possibility for some Skywarn teams. It could be a radio cache. Whatever it might be, ensuring that resources are comprehensively managed is critically important. Integrated communications is absolutely vital for Skywarn, where communications is the backbone for almost everything that we do, whether it be radio communications over amateur radio or GMRS or public safety radio, or whether it be utilizing internet-based platforms such as Slack or Discord or social media such as X or Facebook, or content platforms such as YouTube. Ensuring that all of our communications are effectively integrated is critically important to ensure that we are meeting the objectives that Kent County Skywarn Command have determined. Establishment and transfer of command is particularly important as a severe weather incident continues to grow in duration, intensity, and scale. Outside of a Skywarn context, in a fire department scenario, it may mean that a firefighter quickly realizes that the span of control is outside their own response. Firefighters also don't respond like law enforcement officers do, in that you don't typically have a single firefighter responding to a scene. Typically, it's more of a team, but all that having been said, within the fire service, establishment and transfer of command happens all the time. Unified command can absolutely happen on a regular basis when you start coordinating across multiple agencies such as police, fire, and EMS. Even within just one particular service, such as the fire service again, you may have multiple fire departments responding to a structure fire or a multi-vehicle traffic accident, such as during some of the winter storms that we get here in Michigan. And so you may have multiple people as part of that unified command from various agencies to all coordinate incident response. Chain of command and unity of command is important for any agency conducting themselves according to NIMS. For Skywarn, it is just as important to ensure that we know who the chain of command is within that Kent County Skywarn severe weather response, as well as unity of command to make sure that the incident commander is effectively working with the various section chiefs who are effectively working with the various directors or supervisors, as the case may be. More on what I mean by those specific position titles later. Accountability is important for everyone, all the way up from the Skywarn coordinator, the incident commander, all the way down to the general Skywarn volunteer, to ensure that everyone is effectively communicating and conducting themselves in a manner as established by our EOPs and SOPs, emergency operations plans, and standard operating procedures. Dispatch and deployment is hugely critical for any agency, but especially for Skywarn, in that we don't want someone to simply decide to go off and chase a storm on their own, for example. They're certainly free to do that on their own, but not functioning as a Kent County Skywarn volunteer. We, as Kent County Skywarn volunteers, we only mobilize when called upon by command to do so. In the case of Kent County Skywarn, the way that we determine that is when the National Weather Service issues various types of weather products, the level of severity of those products determine our activation level, and it makes it very straightforward and takes a lot of the intuition out of it, such that we don't have to necessarily guess how to activate and at what level. We can generally just follow the standard SOPs that we've established to effectively scale up and down our incident response in accordance with what the National Weather Service has issued. Information and intelligence management is the last NIMS characteristic that I'll just briefly highlight once again this evening. I say once again because this has been covered more extensively in part one. A reminder if you have not seen it. Information and intelligence is not as relevant for Skywarn necessarily, although we do certainly cull information and bring information into the discussion. But in the context of a law enforcement environment, such as law enforcement officers or something that serve underneath law enforcement, such as a search and rescue team, information and intelligence management becomes even more critically important. All that having been said, these NIMS characteristics are vitally important in ensuring that Skywarn teams conduct themselves in alignment with all of the other public and private sector agencies out there that follow the standardized format in the United States for meeting the national preparedness goal. So, a derivative of NIMS, in order to effectively meet the command and coordination principle of NIMS, is ICS. ICS, the Incident Command System, according to FEMA, is a standardized approach to incident management that, quote, is used for all kinds of incidents by all types of organizations and at all levels of government. ICS is applicable to small incidents as well as large and complex ones. Can be used not only for emergencies but also for planned events. Enables a coordinated response among various jurisdictions and agencies. Establishes common processes for incident level planning and resource management. Allows for the integration of resources such as facilities, equipment, and personnel within a common organizational structure, end quote. It is a beautifully comprehensive and coherent system that I have seen work absolutely effectively time and again across multiple agencies to effectively respond to the type of incident at play. And it is something that Kent County Skywarn in the months and years ahead absolutely is going to ensure that we are compliant with, to ensure that we respond to severe weather in a manner which most beneficially serves our served agencies. But as I mentioned earlier, ICS fundamentally is a structure. It's not only a way of thinking, but it is fundamentally a structure. Here is that structure, the ICS organization chart. Here in this org chart, we can see that we've got various positions such as incident commanders, we've got a PIO, a public information officer, we've got various chiefs, we've got various unit leaders. We have all of this organizational structure built out. But we have to ask ourselves, do we always need every component of this? And the answer to that, of course, is no. ICS absolutely does not demand that you build out every single position, regardless of the scale of the incident. In fact, the principle of modularity and span of control, those two principles would state that you only build out what you need and you don't build what you don't need. And we're going to conclude this video in a little while with looking at various scenarios for how we would do that in a Skywarn specific context. But let's say that you're not as familiar with the ICS org chart as perhaps someone who has studied it for a period of time and worked within those org charts during actual incidents. The ICS org chart consists of two general categories of staff, the command staff and the general staff. So, who is the command staff? You can see it outlined in blue. The command staff, first and foremost, starts with the IC or the incident commander at the top. Now, again, you might actually have multiple incident commanders all serving on the same incident if you have a unified command where you've got multiple different kinds of agencies, such as police, fire, and EMS serving in that role. But for a Skywarn context, we're not necessarily going to have a unified command in that we don't have multiple agencies all engaged in the same Skywarn team. The IC underneath him, but also part of the command staff, he may appoint a PIO, a public information officer, to deal with traditional media, such as broadcast media interviews, or to provide updates on social media. Legal officer, probably not utilized in a Skywarn context, but that might be utilized by other agencies as needed. Liaison officer to ensure that the Skywarn team is effectively liaising with other Skywarn teams that are out there, such as here in Kent County, Michigan. I may, if I'm serving as the IC, appoint someone to manage resources who can liaison between the various neighboring counties we have. A safety officer, which is something that I have included in the exercises we have done that have a written incident action plan, and something I absolutely want to include more in future severe weather incidents, because having a robust Skywarn safety culture that is responsible and effective is something that I think, as the Kent County Skywarn coordinator, is crucially important for ensuring safe and successful team operations in the years to come. And then as part of that command staff, you might have other roles that aren't even listed on this chart. But that is the command staff. They are the ones that are going to be running the show, so to speak. They are the ones that are going to be calling the shots. Underneath the command staff, we have our general staff. The general staff, they are going to be the doers, the operations chief, the planners, such as those within the planning section, the getters, those that are part of logistics, and the wallets, or those that are doing the financing, the financial functions, such as those in the finance and administration section. So we can see here the traditional ICS structure is such that we have our four main sections: operations, planning, logistics, and then finance and administration is one section. I will add, in more recent years, sometimes intelligence has been added as a fifth section. Typically, that's more utilized by a law enforcement agency. Sometimes I have also seen intelligence, however, roll up underneath planning rather than being stood up as a separate section. But just keep that in mind. You may see in years to come intelligence added as a fifth section on these ICS org charts. So the general staff, they all report to the command staff. We understand that. They have four main categories of functions that they do. But you'll notice that each section has a chief. These are known as the section chiefs. We have the ops chief, the planning chief, the log chief, and then the finance admin chief. The operations section chief is responsible for ensuring that all the doers, all of those that operate during the incident, that are performing the operations to meet incident objectives, that they're doing so effectively. The planning section chief is going to ensure that all of the resources are checked in and checked out properly, that the situation unit is collecting the information that they need to properly inform command, that all incident documentation is being properly maintained. The log chief, logistics section chief, is going to ensure that the service and support that everyone from the incident commander down needs is met during that incident. The service branch director may be in charge of the communications unit, which is going to be led by a COML, a communications unit leader. The medical unit leader is going to be responsible for ensuring that incident personnel have the medical treatment that they need. If it is a more medical oriented incident, such as an MCI, a mass casualty incident, then those that are conducting medical operations for, say, the general public who have been injured, those particular personnel will fall within operations. But the, the who heals the healers, basically, those are going to be the people that are part of the med unit underneath the service branch director in logistics. The food unit critically important that everyone is able to function and get fed. So you absolutely can have a food unit leader serving underneath the log chief in an incident. The support branch director is going to ensure that the supplies, that the ground support resources, facilities. I have not ever served in an incident with a vessel support unit leader, but if you are having more maritime based operations, that could be important. But nevertheless, logistics fundamentally provides the services and the support needed to all the other sections to ensure that the objectives for that operational period are being met. So let's say, for example, that the command section needs a radio cache in order to be able to talk effectively with each other. Who's going to be responsible for doing that? The logistics chief. Who is the logistics chief going to delegate that responsibility to? Because the logistics chief has a lot more to worry about than just a radio cache. That's very important, but he's responsible for a lot more. He or she is responsible for a lot more than just that. The communications unit leader then steps in and provides that radio cache. In a Skywarn context, we would utilize the command staff and the general staff insofar as operations planning and logistics go. Because we are volunteers, we do not have a financial section because we are not reimbursed monetarily for our time. Ops or operations in a Skywarn context at a Kent County Skywarn level is always going to be run by the net controller, or the NCS as amateur radio operators like to call it. The operations chief is going to be running the spotter operations and the radar operations for Kent County Skywarn. In ham jargon, we like to use the phrase net control, and it's not necessarily a bad term to use, but nevertheless, that is how they are functioning. They are functioning as that operations section chief because they are running the spotter operations on the net. They are also running the radar operations and calling upon people to provide radar operations during the net. Now, if we are dealing with a significantly larger incident and we've got people out in the field that are mobile spotters, the net control station may not be the ops section chief anymore. It might be someone such as an auxiliary communicator actually serving underneath the COML in logistics. You might have multiple net controllers because at that point in time, the ops section chief, they are still responsible fundamentally for running spotter and radar operations, but they can't possibly be the one that's running a net. That then becomes the responsibility of the communications unit underneath logistics, because communications is a service that is provided for everyone throughout the incident. And again, service is one of the two fundamental reasons for logistics. But in a county level context for Kent County Skywarn, I would say that the operations chief is always going to be filled by the net controller. They are going to be the ones that are running the spotter operations and the radar operations. Now, we have to remember with ICS that we only add the positions that we need. If we are dealing with a very small severe weather incident, the IC may be serving as the operations chief at the same time. If you don't have a unit built out, who is then responsible for fulfilling the functions of that unit? Again, the principle of chain of command comes into play. The person up the chain of command then becomes directly responsible. So let's say, for example, that I, as Skywarn coordinator, am running a Skywarn net for a local severe thunderstorm that only lasts 30 minutes. Do I necessarily need to appoint someone else to run a net if I have the means to do so and nothing really happens, thankfully, and it only lasts for 30 minutes? Probably not. But do the operations functions still need to happen? They absolutely do. So, according to chain of command, who then becomes responsible for running operations if I am serving as the incident commander and I don't appoint an operations section chief? I do. Again, chain of command dictates that any function that has not been delegated to someone then falls or then goes back up the chain. Planning is critically important. Planning people are typically those that are very familiar and often really enjoy the documentation aspects of the incident command system. The planning chief, which amateur radio operators might think of more traditionally as a scribe, is not only going to be responsible for documentation, such as mobilization logs, radio communication logs, and so forth. They're also going to ensure that mobilization is being properly done, such as staging resources via radio or online check-ins. They may not necessarily provide forecast analysis and so forth themselves, but nevertheless, they may need to run a situation unit that is looking at forecast analysis and guidance from weather models from the National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center. But again, if the scale of the incident doesn't necessarily require that all of those functions be delegated to someone else, who then does it fall upon to fulfill those responsibilities, which still need to happen? It goes up the chain. And so the incident commander in a Skywarn context may be taking on some or all of those roles, depending on the nature of the incident. Logistics, we've talked about, provides both the services and the support for incident response. In a Skywarn context, logistics are not always something that we necessarily need, but especially during any kind of tornado-based severe weather response, such as if we are in if we are in an area-wide tornado watch or something like that, and we've got 30, 40, maybe even 50 people checking into a net, we then start to need someone who can coordinate logistics and communications, because the operations section chief, the net controller, and the incident commander, who might be myself or might be a deputy coordinator or might be multiple deputy coordinators or might be all of us as a leadership team, we may not have the bandwidth to start providing that support and that service for the incident. And so we may designate one of ourselves, a deputy coordinator, might fulfill that role, or someone else might start fulfilling that role, whereby the service and the support needed for Kent County Skywarn is being met for that incident. A practical example would be if we have a larger scale incident and we have people on amateur radio, if we have people on public safety radio communicating with the EOC, if we have people communicating on Slack with the National Weather Service office, if we have people that are communicating with us on Facebook, on Discord, on X, if we have people that are operating on the general mobile radio service, if we have people that are operating on push-to-talk cellular solutions such as Zello, you can see the need for someone to be able to provide the logistics support for all of those communications channels. And we indeed have delegated, depending on the size of the incident, someone to fill that specific role. But again, if there's not someone directly appointed to do that, it becomes the responsibility of the person higher up the chain. The incident commander would then be responsible for fulfilling those roles. And lastly, finance and administration in a Skywarn context is not necessarily something that we would utilize, being unpaid professionals. And I highlight unpaid professionals because the culture that I think is vitally important, not only for Kent County Skywarn, but for any volunteer agency, is yes, you absolutely can have fun. You can be fulfilled as a volunteer and so forth. And ultimately, if you're not going to continue in that role. But don't think of yourself as someone who is not a professional. Strive to always be professional. The only difference is that you are not paid for it. In one of my training videos I produced for more directed for amateur radio operators, I really tried to impress on many of those who are traditional hams who come from the amateur radio community is that when you are providing an auxiliary communications service for a served agency, such as an emergency management agency, It's wonderful to enjoy the hobby aspects of amateur radio outside of that, but leave that at the door and do your best to function as an unpaid professional, such that the way you utilize radio discipline on the air is no different than a law enforcement officer or a dispatcher, and you're not engaging in extended conversations or bringing in all the ham jargon that you might otherwise enjoy in a hobby perspective. But all that having been said, you can find more information on that in an additional training video that I've already produced. Suffice to say, within this broader ICS structure, Skywarn, whether it be Kent County Skywarn or other Skywarn teams, we need the command functions, we need the general staff functions, but because we're not being paid, we probably don't need the financial functions. So let's look at how we apply ICS to Skywarn incidents. We're going to look at three different incident scenarios here. Again, by way of reminder, ICS can and absolutely should, I would state, be applied to any Skywarn severe weather incident, regardless of the size or the duration. Now, I realize that this may be new for many Skywarn teams that are more used to functioning as an amateur radio weather club. Amateur radio is wonderful. Amateur radio clubs are wonderful, and a fascination with weather is wonderful. However, when you are serving an agency such as the National Weather Service Office or an emergency manager, I would strongly encourage that you not think of yourself in that regard, but think of yourself as an emergency management volunteer corps. And as such, we need to be utilizing ICS because that is what our served agencies have been using probably for years, if not decades, at that point. ICS is modular, meaning we only add what we need and we remove what we don't need. So, for example, if there is an isolated severe thunderstorm, do I, as Kent County Skywarn coordinator, want to create this massive org chart and try and fill all these positions that I don't end up needing? No, that actually goes against what NIMS and ICS teach by way of doctrine. It's modular. We only add what we need and we remove what we don't need. That's going, of course, to be determined by the complexity, the size, and the duration of a Skywarn incident. So in this first scenario, we have a local severe thunderstorm. The operational period for this severe weather incident is 1 hour, and the area is a portion of one county. Let's say in a Kent County Skywarn context, we have a severe thunderstorm that lasts for approximately an hour for the northeastern portion of Kent County. How many positions from the ICS org chart do I realistically need to add for that size of an incident? Well, let's say that it's a severe thunderstorm. It blows some tree limbs down, maybe blows some patio furniture over, but thankfully doesn't do any damage to critical infrastructure or area residences, and residents are not displaced or otherwise negatively impacted. I probably only really need to appoint someone to run operations and someone to run planning. And if I am in the position to run that operations by being the net controller, I then serve the command staff function as the incident commander. I serve as the liaison function by appointing liaisons to other county teams. I serve in the operations section chief function by running the radar and the spotting operations on that Skywarn net. And I may appoint someone to perform the planning function, such as a scribe, to maintain documentation. And so I may only have two people, myself and perhaps a planning chief, or as we traditionally call them, a scribe, to maintain documentation, because that's all that we need. I don't need to build out a comprehensive org chart for something that is limited in duration and limited in area and intensity. Many of our late night Skywarn activations for pop-up severe thunderstorms have only needed exactly this, for example. But let's say we have a second scenario where we have multiple severe thunderstorms that demand that we have an operational period of multiple hours. Let's say in this context, 4 hours. It encompasses the entire county because these multiple severe thunderstorms, we know they're coming. We can see them on radar 1 to 2 hours out. They roll through and they knock trees over, they knock power lines over. What do I then need as the Skywarn coordinator to appoint in utilizing the ICS structure for specific positions? I may appoint an IC, which is likely going to be myself, or it's going to be a deputy coordinator if I'm not available. I'm absolutely going to appoint an ops chief in that case if I need to then make the command decisions and I don't have the bandwidth to run the operations on a net. So a deputy coordinator might step in and run that absolutely critical and wonderful component of the ops chief of running the net. I may ask another deputy coordinator to serve in that logistics role as the log chief, whereby they can monitor all these various communication channels. They can report via NWS chat, the NWS chat to our served agencies. And I may appoint yet another deputy coordinator or a general volunteer to be in charge of planning, in other words, maintaining incident documentation and to help coordinate forecast analysis and so forth to make sure that the command staff unit is making the appropriate decisions. And so again, the scale is always going to determine which positions you need and what one team may need, another team may not. But these are all practical ways in which the ICS methodology can and indeed should be utilized by Kent County Skywarn and other Skywarn teams out there. Now, our particular National Weather Service office has not deemed that an area-wide Skywarn team, a singular team, is needed, which is perfectly fine. Ultimately, teams exist to meet the needs of the served agency. One of the things that we are blessed with here in West Michigan is because we have larger counties, we don't necessarily need an area-wide team for the larger counties because those counties are able to maintain their own teams that report to the county emergency managers. But for other National Weather Service offices in the state of Michigan, especially those that cover more of a rural area where you don't have those larger counties and larger population centers at play, they have elected to go with an area-wide team. But regardless, let's say that I become responsible for running Skywarn operations, or you become responsible for running Skywarn operations for the state of Oklahoma, and it is springtime, it is May, and that is not a good combination in the state of Oklahoma. Let's say that you have a statewide tornado outbreak as a statewide Skywarn coordinator, and you become responsible for coordinating a statewide response for that event. How are you going to be able to effectively do that? Well, the same way that I would in being responsible at a county level for Skywarn severe weather response. Again, we just build out the ICS structure that we need. We delegate what we are not able to do ourselves, and we just can continue to keep doing that until the incident objectives are met, either for that operational period or if it continues for as many operational periods as it takes. So let's say in this last scenario, we have a statewide tornado outbreak with an ops period of 12 hours. It encompasses the entire state. And so what do we need in terms of positions? We need everything, except maybe the finance section because we're not being paid. But with that aside, we need a lot of positions to effectively manage an entire state's response on the Skywarn level. So first thing to do, establish the command staff section. We need an incident commander that is going to be at the top of the org chart. We need a deputy IC that is going to serve as a second in command. Now, again, you could say that we need unified command where we have multiple incident commanders. That's also a perfectly valid way of doing it too. But in this scenario, we've got one incident commander at the top of the org chart. He or she appoints a deputy IC as a second in command. We have a liaison officer ultimately responsible for appointing liaisons between county emergency management agencies and NWS officers, as well as perhaps partner agencies such as the Salvation Army and the American Red Cross. The IC also is likely going to appoint a PIO, a public information officer, that handles any media inquiries or inquiries from the NWS offices in the state of Oklahoma and emergency managers, as well as a safety officer responsible for ensuring all spotter operations are conducted safely, especially mobile spotting, which can be very dangerous very quickly if it's not done properly. The command staff also needs the general staff, broken up by operations planning and logistics. And so the ops chief is likely going to appoint a couple different types of branch directors, such as a spotter branch director and a radar branch director, in order to ensure that spotting and radar operations are conducted effectively. The spotter branch director, in turn, may appoint two different kinds of supervisors underneath him or her, such as the mobile spotter supervisor that manages all of the mobile spotters that are out there across the state. And in fact, you might have multiple supervisors depending on, again, the span of control that you need. The stationary spotter supervisor is going to manage the stationary spotters that are likely staying at home and reporting conditions from their home locations. The radar branch director might appoint two different types of supervisors, such as the mesoscale radar supervisor and the synoptic radar supervisor. If you're not familiar with that weather jargon, it simply means that you've got people that are looking at radar in the local area, as well as people that are looking at radar across multiple states and throughout the country. The mesoscale radar supervisor would be supervising the radar analysts that are looking at local radar, synoptic radar supervisor looking at analysts that are looking at multiple states, multiple regional, in other words, regional radar. We need a planning section chief to write an incident action plan for us and to oversee the documentation unit. There's likely going to be a lot of incident documentation, such as ICS 309s and 214s from this incident. We need to ensure that's all properly maintained and cataloged. The documentation unit is going to be overseeing all of the various scribes that are assisting the net controllers from the communications unit over in logistics. We'll get to logistics in just a moment. But the planning section chief will also very likely establish a situation unit director, whereby we have a product branch supervisor that manages the resources that are analyzing NWS and SPC products, as well as a weather model supervisor that are managing analysts that are analyzing weather models. The situation unit director fundamentally provides the information to the planning chief, who provides it back to the command staff section, whereby the command, ultimately the incident commander and those that serve alongside him or her, can make the overall command decisions that need to be made for effective response. And the log chief, the logistics section chief, can establish a service branch director, such as a communications unit leader who may write the ICS 205 radio communication plan for all of the various nets that are needed. The communication unit leader, in turn, may call upon multiple AUX-Cs, auxiliary communicators, who are certified in providing that auxiliary communications service in the COMMU, the communications unit. And these AUX-Cs may serve as net controllers throughout various counties, various regions, various levels of the ICS org chart. Not listed in this particular example, but you might have a support unit leader that or a support branch director that oversees, for example, a mobile support unit leader providing support needed to mobile spotting units, for example, like ensuring that they know where they can go for fuel and that they have the resources that they need for that. Going back to the service branch for just a moment, very importantly, you might have a food unit leader who is feeding the resources deployed at incident facilities and staging areas, such as various areas where mobile spotters might be staged, at EOCs or NWS offices where net controllers might be, and so on and so forth. So all that having been said, as we now wrap this two-part video series up, strongly encourage all Kent County Skywarn team members to continue studying the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System. This is the direction that Kent County Skywarn is not only moving now, but will continue to be aligning ourselves with in the months and years to come. And so if you're interested in additional information, strongly recommend that everybody take these 4 independent study courses from FEMA. IS 100, the Introduction to the Incident Command System. IS 200, the Basic Incident Command System for Initial Response. IS 700, an Introduction to the National Incident Management System. And finally, IS 800, the National Response Framework and Introduction. When you take these, not only is it tremendously helpful for Skywarn, but it also will very likely make you eligible to serve on most volunteer agencies, where these 4 courses are generally the minimum requirements needed to serve as a volunteer for an emergency management agency. So in conclusion, I hope that this two-part series has been very helpful. I hope that it has provided concrete examples whereby we can see that this is not simply theory, but very vital information that we both not only in the future, but even in the present and in fact in the past under current leadership have implemented to do our best to effectively respond. Skywarn leaders will continue to be aligning the team in the future with the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System. And so if you have any questions on that, if you have any questions on NIMS or ICS, please feel free to leave a comment below. Or if you're a Kent County Skywarn team member, please feel free to reach out to us at our leadership email. We would absolutely be more than happy to help you learn more about NIMS and ICS as we continue to learn more about NIMS and ICS ourselves. And we want to do our best to help you as a Skywarn volunteer to be fulfilled ultimately in helping our community meet the national preparedness goal. So with that, I wish you all the best, and I will see you next time.